Okay, do any of you remember maps? And no, I'm not talking about Google Maps. I'm not talking about hitting the button on an app and on your smartphone and getting the immediate gratification of knowing where you are at all times. I'm talking about a good old-fashioned paper map, the kind that has creases and labels. Back in the old days, distracted driving was not texting while you were behind the wheel. Distracted driving in the days of old was the effort you had to make to unfold a giant map and figure out where you were without absolutely losing your mind. And I love maps, by the way. I love maps. In the military, I was trained with an old school map, a protractor, a compass, a stubby pencil to find my way from point A to point B. It was terrain association, dead reckoning, pace count, hitting an azimuth, and having that deep satisfaction of walking up to a spot and knowing where you were on the map. And by the way, maps are not easy. Maps require a brain. They require effort. They require knowing where you are at any given time, because once you lose sight of the landmarks, you have to orient the map, look around you, find something that matches, and then, regain your understanding of your current position and how it relates to wherever it is you're going. It also involved some degree of trust. You got to trust your map is accurate. You got to trust your map is up to date. I used to belong to AAA also. They had a cool feature you could get back in the day called triptychs. Remember those triptychs? You may have seen them. Triptychs. You told AAA where you were going, they would build you a set of map cards. It would just flip open. They were laminated and they were in sequence. So you didn't have to fight with the big map. You just flipped it to the next part of your drive and there you were. No big giant paper map in the car. It was like a progression of what was better about maps. But one thing that a map could never do, though, like I said a moment ago about being up to date, one thing a map could never do is account for changes in the road. Things like detours and traffic and construction zones. Those were all the unknowns. But then came the era of GPS and everything changed. I thought GPS was frivolous when it first came out. I eschewed the silliness of trusting a machine to tell me where I was at any given time. But then I went to the Pentagon in 2009 and I realized that I was going to be driving around the big city, right? I was going to be up there in DC, unfamiliar territory. It was big city madness, traffic, all of it. So I got into my first foray of GPS navigation. I bought a TomTom. Anybody remember those? TomToms. You had to download the updates constantly off of CD-ROMs. You could select your voice too. You could literally choose the voice you wanted to talk to you. So I had the lovely voice of a young British girl named Mandy, who would speak to me in soothing tones as I traversed the giant metropolis of Washington, D.C. "Excuse me, please turn right ahead." "Thank you, Mandy. That's very kind of you." By the way, I heard you could download other voices. You could even download one that sounded like Mr. T. "Turn right, fool!" But I had a feeling that one of the voices like that would incite me to violence, so I never went there. But even still, Mandy would sometimes have to get yelled at when she didn't know there was construction. And in D.C., there was always road construction. "Excuse me, please turn right ahead." "Well, I can't really do that, can I, Mandy?" "Please stand by while I reroute you." "Yes, please, Mandy. Why don't you do it and hurry up?" Anyone driving by would have seen me waving my hands like an orchestra conductor as I shouted at Mandy. But it was still better than the old school maps, really. And now you just get on your phone and drop a pin. Drop a pin. Post the speed traps for all your fellow travelers. See the roads and the construction zones before you even get there. Now you can actually make a plan. And yes, I always prefer a plan. You see, I can take the road less traveled as well as anybody can. I like to see what's down there, I love backcountry hiking and exploring, but when it comes to most days, I do like to know where I'm going. And I'm a planner by nature, and I'm a list maker. And sometimes when life gets to be sort of getting the upper hand on me, it actually makes me feel better to sit down and create an updated to-do list. And when I'm really grooving, I'll even make the list and then I'll rank order the various tasks and set my priorities. I have started or helped start multiple businesses, and I learned early on to do what's called a SWOT analysis, to examine the whole business case in light of its strengths and weaknesses and obstacles and threats. And when I go to court as an attorney, I try to have a litigation plan with a desired end state in mind for my client that comes from having researched the law to knowing our position before I ever appear in front of the judge. Part of that is just me. I've taken tests to determine my gifts and talents before, and mine have always been leadership and administration. I mean, basically, I like to plan. And I was trained in the Army to conduct detailed planning. Every operation, every mission, every training event. Before I took my team downrange to Afghanistan, I had to do a brief back to the higher-ups to lay out the plan for everything that we would try to do, from daily operations to escape and evasion. Now granted, not every plan survives first contact with the enemy, and that's the truth. But if you don't plan at all, if you don't try to map out your future, if you don't try to get it all down in a way that makes sense and you know your route, well, you know what happens. It's the old adage that a failure to plan is a plan to fail. There's also another old adage, by the way, from an unknown source that I've heard many times, and that is, when making a plan, remember the enemy gets a vote. The first saying means clearly if we don't think things through, have a well thought out plan with contingencies and logistics and timelines, that we're just dooming ourselves to an increased likelihood of failure. But the other adage means that as surely as we are making our plans, the enemy is making theirs as well. In other words, when the bullets start flying, the enemy has a say in the final outcome, and we better remember that. Maybe that's why I'm enjoying watching the Trump administration work. Because they told us in advance what the end state was be. We can actually see the plan. Because they announced the plan. And they are working the plan. A lot of talk right now about Trump's tariffs, the Trump agenda, the Trump doctrine, MAGA, whatever. The fact is, we can see a plan, and they are actually working the plan. We just spent 4 years under the Biden administration watching them just put their finger in the air and trying to decide which way the wind was blowing that day. There never seemed to be a cohesive effort. There never seemed to be a team working on an actual plan. Did they have a roadmap for where they were going? I don't know. Did they know? No, I don't think so. In the last 2 years of his administration, Biden rarely even met with the press, and just as rarely held a cabinet meeting. Like in the final days of his term, Biden finally held a cabinet meeting, and he promptly turned it over to his wife, who then ran the meeting while his son Hunter sat there and looked on. Nobody could figure that out. There was no understanding. There was no list. There was no agenda. There was no analysis. There was no plan. The bottom line is you have to know what you stand for before you can truly take meaningful action. And having a plan is like having a map. It guides you to your ultimate destination. So if the leader fails, anybody else can then pick up the map or the plan and still move forward because it's all right there in front of you. In the absence of a plan, anything can happen. In the absence of a mission priorities or a task organization, the unit can just flounder on the battlefield. So yeah, I'm a planner by nature. I try to order my steps. I try to examine the way forward and then chart the various steps and milestones that we have to take to achieve them. And I'm thankful to finally have a team back in the White House that actually seems to have a plan. Because the American people literally deserve a plan. I mean, tell us what you're doing. Tell us where we're going. Tell us what it's all for. Tell us what we're going to achieve. Tell us how it impacts us if we do and if we don't. Is there a doctrine? Is there serious analysis? Is there a plan? No traveler should ever be without a map, right? No leader should ever be without a plan. And yes, plans matter. Plans unify. Plans breed success because they give focus, they maintain direction. A failure to plan, yeah, it's a plan to fail, but the enemy does get a vote, yes. And when shots ring out, they soon enough start flying in both directions. Don't think for a minute that Democrats are going to sit idly by, because that is the opposition in this case. They're not going to sit idly by and just let Republicans have their way. So how do we nullify that progressive influence? How do we galvanize grassroots support for when times get dicey politically? How is it that we can keep the team focused? Well, I love a good plan. It gives us something to rally around. But the enemy gets a vote too, so it better be a good plan. Now, I can think back on this. Think back in history. Remember when Newt Gingrich and the Republican wave took office in the 90s? And they brought in what was known as the Contract with America. The Contract with America was an actual map. It was a roadmap, if you will. It was a plan. They came in and they said, if you will vote us in, and by the way, they all signed their names to it before they were elected. They said, if we are elected, this is the plan that we will follow. And man, they did. And it was dynamic. And the people bought into it, because when the people can see the plan, it gives them confidence that those who are asking to be in charge, or for that matter in charge, actually get it and know what to do. There's a lot to be said about at the state level too. We had that happen in 2010. When I got elected to the Alabama State Senate in 2010, Republicans took the legislature over for the first time in 136 years. Democrats had controlled it for over a century, nearly a century and a half. But we took it back, and we did it with a plan that was much like that contract with America. We called it the handshake with Alabama. It was our agreement with the people of the state that if you will elect us, these are the things that we'll do, and everybody could see it. And we all knew what to do. And when we got there, by God, we did it. But yeah, that old adage still remains: a failure to plan is a plan to fail. That's why it is so dynamic to watch what's happening with everything going on in the Trump administration. So what's the plan? Because there's a lot of talk out there right now about Trump tariffs and Trump tax cuts and DOGE and America foreign policy and right-sizing of government. And none of it's being done willy-nilly, though. We're watching a well-executed plan with multiple facets, multiple factors, multiple phase lines. But in this plan, I believe that what we're watching also, and here's my main point, I think we're watching out is the mapping of the American dream. Literally, the mapping of the American dream. Showing people what it will take, and that why Make America Great Again is not just a slogan. Make America Great Again is like saying, we're going to make sure that the American dream not just survives but thrives. We're going to make sure that people know that they've got the ability to take it to the next level, to be successful, to prosper, to venture out, to find new ways and exciting ways of existing. So how do you do that? There's different things that I think I'd like to point out a few. And so a few years ago, Charlene and I, my lovely wife, we built a house, this house, right here where I'm sitting. And we lived in the house prior to this one for 24 years. But the day came, we began to dream about building a house that had the features that we wanted, the things that we designed, spaces that we would have to bless our family, create a welcoming atmosphere, places we could share with friends. It was a dream. So we went through the whole process from soup to nuts. We chose a design, we changed the design, we chose a contractor, we got bids and estimates, we secured our financing, we broke ground. It was not always fun, but there was a plan. There had to be. I mean, the electricians couldn't do their work until the framers finished, and the framers couldn't do their work till the foundation was laid. And the foundation couldn't go in till the site was prepped, and the lot was cleared, and the permits were pulled, and the financing was, all of it, on and on and on. It was a plan. Each aspect of the plan relied on the part before it. You know, and I learned a lot too, and there's some analogies I can draw from building a house to rebuilding the American dream, mapping the way forward, putting an orderly plan in place. I'm a pretty handy guy, but I've never built a house, right? So I talked about building this house. I learned all kinds of things building this house. But I also learned in reality, sometimes the things you can't see later are what takes the longest, and they make the house the strongest. There are things you can't see right now, like the insulation we put in the walls. We put in spray foam insulation. It has paid for itself in just 4 years. Our power bills are extremely low by comparison to our friends. It's one of the things you can't see, but it had to go in before the sheetrock did. And one of those moments that we had to wait on, one of those things I learned about is what contractor folks call getting it all dried in. Getting a house dried in, that means the exterior of the house is completely weatherproofed. All the walls, the roof has been sheathed, the windows and doors are installed, a weather-resistant barrier has been applied, basically making the house secure to the elements so that it marks the point where the building envelope is complete and protected. It ain't sexy, it's not the finished work, it's not all the pretty stuff, but it's key. It's key to being able to move forward. It's part of the plan. And when you have a plan, you have milestones you have to meet. I once lived in a neighborhood where a contractor built what was called spec houses. Those are speculative homes that are built with no buyers in mind. This particular contractor almost ruined our neighborhood as he built one spec house after another, but before he would dry one in, he would go start another one, and pretty soon we had rotting, weed-ridden half houses all over our beautiful neighborhood. Look, there's no wisdom in moving on to work another house when you haven't dried in the first one. And in my opinion, what we're watching right now is the Trump administration working as quickly as possible to get the American dream dried in. They have a roadmap, they have a plan, they have a construction process they have to go through, if you will. The Biden admin, they just threw everything they had into open borders globalism and just left us to rot like an old spec house. But the plan that we're working under right now It requires that we secure the structure of the nation, solidify the weatherproofing of the economy, our borders, our security apparatus, our culture. So yeah, we spent the last 4 years watching as the American dream was just spit on by the progressive left. They trashed not just our country, but even who we are as a country. Nothing was sacred. Anything goes. Value meant nothing. Faith was mocked. There's a liberal mantra out there that even says the American dream is gone, that our nation is somehow only for the privileged or the rich or certain racial demographics, that systemically our nation has made it unrealistic for some people to rise up because all power is vested in a few, that somehow the ability to rise up and achieve success or to accumulate wealth or to be fulfilled has been stymied, and therefore the few must pay their fair share so that an equitable distribution can be made to those who don't have their own fair share. Yeah, they call it equity. Equity was never the root basis for the American dream, though. But what we're watching right now, as Trump works to get the American dream dried in, should not surprise anyone. You know why? Because he had a plan. He said what we're seeing right now with tariffs, and he said what we're seeing right now with the dynamics of the energy sector and the revisions to our military and the corporate structure he's putting in place and the removal of deep state actors. He said this would be exactly what he would do. It was his plan, and we voted him in because of it. In Trump's final speech on the eve of that last election in November, he swore that what you are seeing right now is exactly what happened. And here's what he said. He said, quote, "My message to Americans is simple. We do not have to live this way. We do not have to settle for weakness, incompetence, decline, or decay." And then Trump went on to say, "We'll help the world. A lot of people think we're isolationists. We're not. But we want the world to appreciate what we're doing, and they have to appreciate that we're helping them." He said, "I'll restore peace in the world, and I'll rescue the American dream." And then he said this, he said, "Together we'll begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country, and we will launch the most extraordinary economic boom the world has ever seen." But it takes a plan, doesn't it? It doesn't happen willy-nilly. It doesn't happen because you wake up in the morning and decide what's maybe next on the list because you just feel like it. There's got to be an orderly process. There's got to be a mapping of it. By the way, the American dream, the actual phrase American dream is said to have been coined by a historian named James Truslow Adams in the first half of the 20th century in a book called Epic of America. Adams said this, he said, "The American dream, the dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for every man, with opportunity for each according to his ability or achievement. It's a difficult dream for the European upper classes to even interpret adequately," he said, "and too many of us ourselves have grown weary or mistrustful of it." Then Adams said, "It's not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, it's a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position." You know, you don't achieve something like that by just harem-scarum, notional leadership. You do it by having a roadmap. You do it by having an intent. You do it by having a map, a plan. Ronald Reagan once said that the American dream is not that every man must be level with every other man. The American dream is that every man must be free to become whatever God intends he should become. Like, I've also seen the American dream labeled as the belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born or what class they were born into, can attain their own version of success in a society in which upward mobility is possible for everyone. Great quote. And we know that there have been struggles for it too, by the way. Struggles not to create equity, as liberals would try to persuade us, but rather struggles to remove the barriers that were put in place to prevent the American dream from being attainable. Martin Luther King Jr., in his letter from a Birmingham jail, he didn't call for handouts. He made his plea to simply allow that men and women of any color could pursue life without inhibition. King said at one point, "We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. That when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage." King went on to say, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Think about that. What he just said was, the Founding Fathers formulated a plan, That plan was in part embodied in documents like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. These founding fathers were planners. They knew what they were doing. So let me ask you that. Do we have that now? I believe the answer is yes. I believe it's yes in all caps. A big fat yes. Is there work to do? Certainly. Every good house starts with tending the foundation, setting in the framing, ensuring good design, and then getting it all dried in so the finished work can take place. That's a construction plan. You don't build a house without it. You don't get things out of order. You have a structured means of approaching it. Same is true for the American dream. If we're going to see the next generation have the ability to succeed and not just strive, but actually thrive, then we have to do all we can to dispel the notion that we must spend ourselves into oblivion, giving so-called equitable shares to those who have been deemed somehow less capable. We have to take charge of our economy. We have to ensure that we have a good foundation before we move on to sending out trillions of foreign aid to others. We have to secure our borders, because without a border, you don't really have sovereign territory. You don't have rule of law. We have to become energy independent so that bad actors on the world stage will not have the upper hand against us by setting prices and availability of energy that we need in the modern world. And I suspect, just like these tariffs that we're talking a lot about right now, I suspect that some of it is going to be short-term painful. I suspect that it is. Some prices may go up in the short term. Some allies are going to get their feelings hurt. Some enemies are already bowing up, calling out for reprisals. But we're already seeing things coming around. It's amazing what can happen when the guiding principle is to actually follow a plan. And we're still a good nation. We will help the oppressed. We will be strong allies to our friends. We're going to be good neighbors to our neighboring nations. But we got to get the house dried in first. We got to follow a plan that makes sense with an orderly progression. The American dream is real, y'all. It's still absolutely real. But it requires a true foundation. All you have to do to maintain the American dream is get the house dried in. It'll be everything you ever hope to see. And every bit of what I just described requires a plan. A map, if you will. You have to know where you're going, and then you have to trust the directions that get you there. And you can't do one thing until you've done the other things that come before it. You have to secure the foundation and get it all dried in before you make it beautiful. So in essence, what we're watching right now with the Trump administration is we are mapping the American dream. And we are following the map. And the road is going to be sometimes bumpy, but all of it is necessary. And at least we finally have a plan. That's my philosophy.